This week in CIST 2611, we'll look at Module 3, Access Controls. Now, access control, this is a fundamental security concept. So what this does is ensures that only authorized individuals or systems can access the resources, the data, network for your organization. It also involves three main categories. You have your physical access controls, logical access controls, and administrative access controls. The physical access controls, these protect the physical spaces like your server rooms, office buildings. Logical access controls, they will use digital security measures like your passwords, encryptions. And then administrative access controls, this involves your policies, procedures, and security guidelines. So in this module, we're going to look at how these access controls function, what their significance is in cybersecurity, and how organizations implement them to safeguard their data. So physical access controls are your first line of defense against unauthorized access to your systems and facilities. Now, some of the physical access controls that are available is maybe guards to monitor and authorize personnel entry, fences and locked doors that will create those physical barriers. You have man trap entry systems. What these do is they ensure that only one person enters at a time. Video surveillance cameras can be used for real-time monitoring and recording. You can have alarms that will detect unauthorized access attempts. So there's a wide range of physical access controls you can use. These measures, once again, they help prevent unauthorized users from physically accessing those critical assets. This reduces the risk for tampering, theft, and sabotage. Now, when we talk about logical access controls, these focus on protecting the digital resources. These are the hardware and software solutions that are used to manage access to resources and those systems. Now, access controls, these include authentication. So you want to verify the user's identity. This can be through a password, biometrics. Make sure that they have the authorization, that they have the permission to access the material they're trying to gain access to. Also, you want to use encryption. You want to secure that data while it's in transit or is at rest. Some other logical access controls, maybe firewalls where you're blocking unauthorized network traffic. An intrusion detection system where it detects and alerts on suspicious activity on your network. So these controls ensure that only authorized users can interact with those digital assets while keeping the attackers out. Now, administrative controls are security policies and procedures that organizations they implement these to enforce those access controls. So these include the policies and procedures that define those security guidelines, hiring practices and background checks to verify the employees are trustworthy. They may use data classification to determine the security levels for the data. One of the big access controls is security training. You use this to educate your employees about the cybersecurity risk. And you put all these together, and the organization then create a structured security framework that's going to be used to complement those physical and logical access controls. So I said, for example, the authentication, it's going to verify the identity of each user. Now you can have this a couple ways. You can have the user's identity verified is have the user provide something. Maybe something they know, such as a password, something they have. There'll be a token, a card they can swap, or something they are. It's a biometric. Now, if you have two-factor authentication, which is becoming more and more required for organizations, the system is going to require a combination of the two above. So it's going to be something they know and something they are, or something they have. It may be a code that's sent to their phone. It may be an authenticator app. So they use their password to log in. Information is sent to the authenticator app, and they put that code in as well. So authorization determines what the user can have access to based on their policies. Some systems may use an access control list where the user has a certain access privileges that can be set up where the user can have access based on the roles um, or their individual accounts. You can also use control what a user has access to specific resources, what time they have access, location. There's a wide range of access control measures that can be put in place. Now, accounting keeps track of what the users can do or what they do. Um, Keeps track of what they access, the amount of time they access those resources, and any changes that were made to it. And what this does, these three A's, it's called the AAA security model. Um, it helps the organization track and manage those users' access to make sure that it is secure and there is accountability. Now, identification is the process of establishing a user's identity within the system. Now, this is something that's often going to be designed, and the rules are going to be established in the authorization policy. So every time the user access a resource, or tries to access a resource, access controls are going to determine whether to grant or deny the access. Now, username is the most common form of identification, but there are other forms that can be used, such as pins, smart cards, biometrics like your fingerprint scans. Those are also ways that can be used for authentication. And like I said, once the user has been identified, the system will determine whether to grant or deny those that access based on the authentication and authorization policies. Now, the federated identity management, think of this as like when you sign in with your Google account to different websites or your Facebook account. That's different ways that you can access a website with another login. So this allows you to use a single set of credentials across multiple organizations. Now, there are some security risks that are introduced with a federated identity system. So if you have a single breach, that can compromise multiple services. So organizations must be carefully um, to regulate what user information is shared. So once again, the federated identity management, it's using a single set of credentials to sign in across multiple organizations. Now, authentication is how the user proves their identity. There are three main authentication factors. Like I said, what you know, that's your password, your PIN, security questions, what you have, the smart cards, security tokens, mobile application apps. Biometrics is what you are. So that is your passwords, your fingerprints, your retinal scans, facial recognitions. And you want to use multiple authentication factors. This increases your security. So you'll use two or more authentication factors to identify the user. For example, a user logs in with a password, which is something they know. Then they have that access code on their phone, which is something they have. Or they may have to scan a fingerprint or some other type of biometrics. That's something they are. So using multiple factor does increase the security for verifying that user. So it makes it much harder for an attacker to compromise that account. So even if they get the passwords, they still have to have the access to the device to get the access code or the biometric. Now, authorization determines what a user can do after authentication. So the system is going to check what network resources the user can access and what they can do with those resources. For example, the access control list, this defines permissions for the users in the groups. You may have role based access controls, which assigns permissions based on the job role. You also have time based and location based restrictions that can limit when and where users can access the systems. So, with this, for example, the role based access control, we have a new user come in. Rather than going into that user account and assigning each individual permission, you would have a job function set up, a role set up, and you would add that user to that role. It is very important also to keep in mind that when a user changes jobs, leaves the organization, or something happens that changes the authorization required for that user, it is very important to then make sure that the users, if they leave the company, that their authorization, their access is revoked. Um, if they move to a different department and they no longer need access to what they previously have, you need to make sure that the permissions line up with the job that they are doing. So once again, it's in that situation, it's easier to create the job roles and assign the users to the job rather than the individual permissions. Accountability ensures that all actions are logged and they are able to be audited. So the system logs they track who has accessed what and when. The audit policies will enforce compliance with those security rules. You may have data retention policies that specify how long the logs must be kept. So this helps to determine any anomalies or any malicious activities that is found. Zero trust security. This operates under the assumption that no user device should be trusted by default. So every access request is verified regardless of the location. You have continuous authentication that ensures security even after the initial login. The zero trust. This does minimize the lateral movements within the network, which reduces the breach risk. So with this, even though the user has successfully passed access control previously, they're not trusted to access another area or resource until they're authenticated again. Now you have three pillars of trust in zero trust. Three pillars of zero trust are workforce, workloads, workplace. The zero trust for workforce. This is the people, whether it's employees, contractors, partners, vendors. They access the work applications by using their personal or corporate managed devices. So the zero trust for workforce ensures that only the right users and secure devices can access the applications. Zero trust for workloads. This pillar is concerned with the applications that are running in the cloud, in data centers, and other virtualized environments. So it focuses on secure access when an API, a microservice, or container is being accessed by a database within its application. Now, the zero trust for workplace. This focuses on security access for all devices. This included your Internet of Things that connect to the enterprise network. So with the access control models, we've talked about some of these. The organization must implement the proper access control. One of the access control models is the principal of least privilege. Now, the principal of least privilege says that you just give your employees or your users the least amount of access and privilege that they need to do their job and nothing more. So you also have a common exploit that you may see is known as privilege escalation, where they are using access control systems. Those are exploited to grant an unauthorized user or maybe a software higher level privileges than they should have. The network access control systems, uh, these block unauthorized devices from accessing the network. They also are used to enforce security policies based on the device type and user credentials. They will quarantine non compliant devices until those security requirements are met. And this is something that's going to be critical for organizations that do support the bring your own device environments. You want to make sure that you have the network access controls set up. Now, account management. This ensures that the user's accounts are secure. Some key practices include creating unique accounts for each user, making sure that you disable inactive accounts to prevent unauthorized access, implement least privilege access to restrict permissions to those accounts, and also proper account management. This reduces the insider threats, security risk. Make sure that you have accounts moved to inactive when they're not used, revoke privileges, make sure everybody has the correct role-based privileges or access with their account. Now, privilege accounts, these are accounts like your admin, your root accounts. They have elevated access to your systems. So you want to make sure you secure those privileged accounts. You want to use the separate admin accounts for system administration. You want to enforce that multi-factor authentication on admin accounts as well. Also, regularly audit privileged account activity. Now, this is something that these type of accounts here are a primary target for attackers because they do have a lot more higher privileges than your regular users. Now, file access control, this defines who can access specific files and folders. You may have some files, privileges in here that you may see read only, where the users can view files but not edit them. Modify lets the users edit but not delete the files. And you may have accounts with full control, where users have complete access. That allows them to even delete the files. Once again, you want to apply the principle of least privilege with your file access. You want to, by doing this, this ensures that the users only access those necessary files. Now, most networks that use Windows computers, you'll have an Active Directory be configured by your administrator. When you have the Active Directory, the administrator configures the domain security policy and it applies to all domain members. Now, some of the things that you want to make sure is set up is like a password policy. That's where the administrator configures the user accounts for the password and lockout policy. So the set to complicate the complexity of the password. For example, it may have the uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols required. You can set it up to where you have to have so many. Password can't be reused until so many times have passed. You may have set account lockout policy be set up where it locks you out if you have too many incorrect password attempts. For example, after 5 attempts, the account locks the user out for 30 minutes, and then that resets after 30 minutes. Now, you do have a lot more security settings available by selecting the local policy folder in Windows. You can see on the screen some of the different policies that an audit policy creates. Now, authentication, the authentication protocols, this establishes secure communication between the users and the systems. Some of these may be the OAuth, it's used for third-party authentication, like signing in with Google. Single sign-on allows the user to use one set of log-on credentials across multiple applications. You may have a password vault. that can protect and store the user's credentials with a single strong password. The hash-based message authentication code. This secures messages using cryptographic hashing. VPNs rely on the HMAC to authenticate the origin of every packet and the data integrity checking. So going back to the AAA model, once again, we'll talk about how authentication verifies the user identity, authorization grants permissions, and the accounting logs the activity for auditing purposes. The example they give here is like the use of a credit card. So the card identifies who can use it, how much the user can spend, and it keeps account of what items the user spent the money on. So this will finish up the presentation for Module 3, Access Control.